Hey, I'm Kelly, and I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. Welcome to the Summit of Galactic Wisdom, Cosmic Perspectives, and Genuine Passion and Excitement by our speakers and QSG practitioners from a wide range of backgrounds and skills. I echo the gratitude that has already been expressed for Julia and add to it my own personal love and respect for who she is as a person, as a woman, as a mother, as a leader, a teacher, a pioneer, and a true galactic ambassador. I also want to give a quick shout out to Margot Zen, who is rocking it behind the scenes, y'all, for real. And I know I could spend the entire hour gushing over either of them, but Julia will want me to get to the point, so let's go. I want to open my presentation with a small confession. Since the topic of dogma is part of this presentation, I've included the number one question you can ask to uncover dogma, whether it's yours or someone else's. And that question is, am I willing to be wrong? While putting my notes together about this topic of UAPs and disclosure, given all of the recent hype and surge in information and congressional hearings and all of the media coverage, the declassified documents, the secret, not so secret government programs, all of the blitz that we've been seeing and witnessing in recent years, and especially recent months, building up to this almost feels like a critical mass point. So, among other things, when considering this in the wider scope of what this could mean to our space friends, the galactic astrology community, and humanity as a whole. In doing all of this, for some reason, I was randomly inspired to test this question on myself. So, which I think is very fitting to demonstrate the point of what we're talking about today, because if I can't practice it, I shouldn't be talking about it, right? Quick side note, my journey to becoming a believer began slowly around the early 2000s. And somewhere around 2009, I had one of my earliest direct, like personal experiences of directly communicating with what I now understand as cosmic beings. Since then, I have had countless amazing conversations and interactions with these intelligences outside of myself. I call them my space friends. And when I'm doing readings, I call them my star guides. So back to my confession. When I reached the section of my notes about dogma, for some reason I asked myself, am I willing to be wrong about their existence, talking about my space friends? And my immediate response was no. I don't want to be wrong about my space friends. They're my space friends. They're real for me. I've had real experiences that I can't explain any other way. But when I asked myself that question, am I willing to be wrong about my space friends and their existence? My immediate response was no, followed pretty quickly with uh-oh, because I knew that response was problematic. Later in the presentation, I'll explain why I recognized that response was problematic given the topic we're going to cover today. And I'll also give you a little insight about how I worked through that response, that no, I'm not willing to be wrong. I had a clarifying realization following that. So I think that's very important to share with you guys. When Julia offered us this opportunity to present for a topic for 2025, here are the first transits that stood out to me as far as energies and opportunities to open the year with. First thing I saw was Jupiter retrograde in Gemini, which started in October 9th of 2024 and will go on through February 4th. Some of the themes here could include rethinking, reviewing, revisiting, revising beliefs, paradigms, ways of thinking, philosophies, worldviews, and dogma, religious or otherwise. Then we have Jupiter retrograde conjuncting Aldebaran, or Aldebaran, depending on how you say that. The dates I have for that are January 5th through March 6th. This will include themes of revisiting diplomacy, reconsidering balanced positions, cooperative approaches, everything in alignment with heart-centered solutions. Aldebaran really encourages us to be compassionate with ourselves and others as we experience these paradigm shifts that we'll talk about, and offering heart-centered responses. So at the same time, Jupiter in retrograde will oppose Antares during those same dates, which gives the opportunity to rethink personal strategies and strategic alliances, and also gives a boost for strategic problem solving and paradigm shifting. And it will also touch on free will and personal responsibility. I just did a video on Antares and how they are protectors of free will, which leads very well into the Chiron in Aries conjuncting Tau Ceti from around January 1st to February 5th, depending on where you're at. Whenever I think of Tau Ceti, I think of the reversal of mind control. So with this conjunction, Chiron and Aries especially, what comes through are themes like clearing false paradigms, reclaiming sovereignty, that's that Aries vibration, healing from collective gaslighting, Tau Ceti, reversing mind control, and healing coerced decisions or gaslighting. Really big stuff and a great way to open the year. Then we have Uranus entering Gemini later in the year, giving it its own slide because Uranus. So somewhere on around July 7th, depending on which timeline you're joining us from, Uranus will enter Gemini, and at that time, the sun will also square Tau Ceti. Just those two alignments in and of themselves will be a powerful combination. But then we also have Pluto in Aquarius, and somewhere in this whole mix, there's a trine of ideas, as I've heard Pam Gregory talk about it, which will be the early degrees of Libra. So you have air, trining air, trining air. So with Uranus entering Gemini, the theme that I have is grab your hats and hold your ass. We're going quantum. Seriously. Uranus and Gemini could exponentially increase the amount of information overload, or it could help us finally kick some of those lingering false paradigms that need to go, or it could jolt us into higher state of perspectives that allow us to ignore the gobs of irrelevant content that we are bombarded with. Yay! Or any number of other unpredictable things, because Uranus. The gift, Lemuria 2.0, vision of a global humanity united in common purpose and shared values. Here is an example of a deep internal desire that I think most of us resonate with, at least to some degree. This is a thought experiment of sorts to quickly capture the essence of what many souls may struggle to reconcile while they observe the world around them, but don't understand why things are the way they are. Can you relate? I'm calling this big picture perspective the gift, aka Lemuria 2.0. It's an archetypal reference to an ideal that many of us may hold, at least at the soul level, if not consciously, and aspire to create or experience here in this lifetime. The gift, Lemuria 2.0, vision of a global humanity united in common purpose and shared values. Imagine a global civilization that prioritizes human rights, environmental sustainability, and spiritual connection. Imagine a global civilization that shares resources for energy, technology, knowledge, food and water, medicine, and so on. Imagine a global civilization with a shared vision of advancing together. Now, holding to this vision, imagine also that this civilization doesn't always get along, doesn't always agree on the same method or approach, and doesn't always understand the quote other side or share the other's frame of reference. But they become willing to discuss these challenges with more empathy and become open to considering a different approach and become willing to remove the idea of sides. When we put our ideals in the context of total utopia, such as Lemuria, the hidden trap of all or nothing thinking can undermine how we go about creating such results. It is important to understand this could potentially be a challenge. But if our collective starseed mission is to integrate, then we must overcome what separates us. This requires a willingness to investigate our own biases and paradigms as much as our desire to know the true intentions of others. So what are some of the things that get in the way, and how do we bridge that gap? Disclosure and the tactical release of information. The current landscape of disclosure poses an important question. Are we witnessing true disclosure or merely the acknowledgement of what can no longer be hidden? Recent developments here in the US include a couple to 3 congressional hearings in recent years where the following terms were entered into official record: interdimensional beings, hybrids, mind-body connection, and non-human intelligence, just to name a few. This level of public engagement suggests a shift in the collective discourse. This topic extends beyond just the UAP phenomena. It touches on how information is managed and released in our modern age. Not just this, but also how we consume and interact with this information as well. This creates an interesting dynamic where disclosure often seems to follow public awareness rather than lead it, suggesting that perhaps some revelations come not from a place of transparency, but from the impossibility of maintaining previous levels of secrecy in our highly connected world. Would you agree? And I consider this a fascinating intersection between our cosmic conversations, like in the galactic astrology community, and the daily grind. The idea of disclosure versus acknowledgement dynamic serves as a perfect microcosm of our larger challenge in navigating the information age. So here's our first Antarean strategy. It's a fun Jupiter and Gemini exercise strategy to get things going. I call this an expansion exercise. It's basically about inspiring curiosity over conspiracy, or you can say it as inspiring curiosity over conflict. Either way works. In this exercise, look at this list and identify your strongest answer first. Just read through the list real quick and notice the one that jumps out at you first. I'll let you read this on your own later. You can screenshot this and do it at home, but then after that, just identify one or more additional answers you're willing to consider and possibly engage in a curiosity discussion with someone who is open to the topic or someone who may be a little standoffish. It's just a fun way to kind of engage in this information, play with it and see what works. The second Antarean strategy to consider is what I call a discernment exercise, where you identify different types of skepticism and see where you might fall on the scale. It's just another fun little exercise that can help you inspire curiosity over conspiracy or conflict. So in this following list of 6 types of skepticism or levels of skepticism, from believer to non-believer, where would you place your critical thinking skills? Total believer, strong believer, open-minded, skeptically inclined but open, total skeptic, or dogmatic non-believer? You see where I'm going with this. Play with this and just see what comes up. Maybe you have some other options that are not on this list. I'd love to hear those too. Are we ready? The way disclosure is currently unfolding also illustrates a key point about our collective readiness. The galactic astrology community may be ready for first contact. Even though broader society shows mixed reactions, the same pattern appears in how different segments of society respond to gradual disclosure. We're seeing a spectrum of responses ranging from deep skepticism to eager anticipation. Strategies for bridge building and promoting curiosity over conflict are so crucial here. When we frame current disclosure patterns within broader collective themes of evolution, it becomes clear that we're not just witnessing the release of specific information about UAPs or non-human intelligence, we're watching the evolution of how humanity as a whole processes paradigm-shifting information, and we're watching it in real time. This highlights the importance of integrating spiritual wisdom and discernment with technological usage. Remember Atlantis and Lemuria? Our cosmic ancestors are rooting for us. They're calling us forward. Maybe we'll get it right this time. Okay, let's talk about dogma. Dogma is still dogma, no matter how shiny the halo. If we use a working definition of dogma as there is no argument you can make, no evidence you can offer that will change my mind, then here are some revealing statements to help uncover dogma. If my belief is challenged by evidence, the evidence must be wrong. If it's always been done this way, it must be the best way. If my truth feels absolute, other perspectives must be invalid. If I'm certain about something, I don't need to examine it. And if new evidence contradicts my beliefs, the evidence must be flawed. Number 4 stands out for me. If I'm certain about something, I don't need to examine it. This is such a powerful one because it captures the essence of dogmatic thinking in such a simple way. It shows how certainty can become a trap that prevents growth and learning. Antarean strategy number 3, the one I started off the presentation with, identifying dogma. The number 1 question you can ask yourself in any moment to gauge your level of bias or even dogma is this: am I willing to be wrong? if you're simply wanting to explore what else is possible with or within a scenario, you can ask yourself, what if I'm mistaken here? What if I'm wrong? What's the worst that can happen? Let me also clarify what I mean by wrong, quote unquote, in the way that I mean it here. This isn't the judgmental right wrong paradigm, good and bad. This is about error, either in thinking process, approach, or results. It's the neutral version related to accuracy. Antarean strategy number 4. I call this one a bridge exercise, also building curiosity over conspiracy or over conflict. So here's a quick list of some handy responses to have in your pocket when you're presented with someone else's skepticism or their dogma that can open the conversation or at least keep it from escalating. It can de-escalate things when someone gets really triggered by their beliefs, and so on. Simply look at them and say, I can see your point. I understand your perspective. I see what you mean. Now, going back to my original confession about, am I willing to be wrong about my space friends? And I said, no. When I looked into that further, I said, why am I not willing to be wrong? Or what am I not willing to be wrong about? So when I sat with that for a minute, I got really honest with myself and said, it would really suck if I came across irrefutable evidence, if I had a different epiphany, not just if I changed my perspective, if I started believing something else, but if something was presented to me to where I couldn't argue the point of my space friends being real, I would be very sad. I'd be devastated. Not gonna lie, that would be a sad day. I would hate it. But at the end of the day, I am willing to be wrong. Even if it hurts, I'm willing to be wrong. Here's another very quick example that's outside of the galactic conversation that was a very real world moment for me. And it was deeply challenging. Okay, this admission is very personal, but it's also very real. It's a moment that I had when my son was about 3 or 4 years old. And guys, just a heads up, it starts off with a deeply held belief that I had growing up and into my early adulthood about men, but I don't carry it now. I have corrected my understanding of this. But when I was younger, I inherited the belief that men kind of suck, that men are selfish and that, at the end of the day, whenever they were making decisions, they would ultimately decide what was best for them or what they wanted to do. And, just kind of selfish. And when I became an adult, I had my own relationship experiences that reinforced that belief. Shocker. And so I just had this belief, not that I hated men, it was just that, ultimately, when it came down to it, men were kind of selfish. That was the belief, that they didn't necessarily have the same feelings as women or didn't feel as deeply. You get the idea. And so when my son was little, I was just so enamored with his spirit, both my kids, my daughter and my son, blown away by how amazing they were, right? I love being a mom. Um, but I remember this moment I was loving on my son and just watching him and being so in awe with how big his heart was, his compassion, and just how much joy he lived with and shared with the world. And without realizing this was just, I was having a mom moment, right? Nothing, my thoughts weren't going about anything specific. But as I'm just loving on and admiring and adoring my son, this thought came in the back of my head out of nowhere, out of nowhere, kind of like the random thought that I started this presentation off with. But this thought crept in the back of my head, and it was this: at what point will my son become just another selfish asshole? No offense. And the instant that thought came up, I was like, no, 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 no. Like, where is this coming from? Like, what's happening? No. So I had obviously a strong reaction to that and I had to stop and go, wait, what is going on? And I realized that I had two completely conflicting beliefs coming up. Cognitive dissonance is the word for that, right? But it was very, very strong. And I realized I held two fundamentally different beliefs. I had a lifetime of inherited beliefs and my own experience. And then I also had this absolute belief and direct observation of my son's compassion and his spirit and his empathy, right? And so in that moment, I realized that I had to choose. Everything in me said, my son is not. In that moment, I realized I had to choose one of those because I couldn't move forward with both of those beliefs. One of them wasn't right. One of them wasn't true. And so I sat for a long while and asked, which one do I really believe more? Everything in me said that my son does not encompass the beliefs that I've held so far. So I have to look at that paradigm. Where did it come from? Why do I have it? And what do I need to do to change it? Because I was unwilling to put that on my son. I was unwilling to believe that at some point my son would become just another stinky man. Like I said, guys, no offense. So I said, okay, what evidence do I have now to support a better belief that men do have feelings? Let's start with that. Let me start with something simple. And I pulled up several men in my life, such as my brother, my spiritual teacher, and believe it or not, my divorce lawyer, who was actually a really good man, introduced to me by my mom. He's a man of integrity. He's a man who cares, and he does things the right way. So I started with those three random men and said, okay, I can work with that. And I challenged myself to look for different evidence moving forward. And let me tell you, it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. So I just gave myself a different reference to start with. Like, men have feelings, right? Men do have feelings. And I started placing that in context with different relationships, friendships, brothers in my community, and stuff like that. And it was very easy, believe it or not, it was actually very easy for me to pull into that new belief and find evidence. It just showed up when I was looking for it. When I started looking for the different evidence and I told my brain what to look for, I was able to see it differently. So that paradigm left very easily. That's not to say I still didn't have some work to do on how I believed about men. So, I've done some other work and some more extensive work since then. But that new reference also changed the way that I interacted with men moving forward. It made me more accountable for how I treated men and therefore the responses that I got from them, not just in relationships, like romantic relationships, but friendships, coworkers, and even, when I started working with inmates, it was just a very, very empowering moment, even though it sucked for a second. So that's just to demonstrate that I've done the work and I trust that if I can do that, you can. I promise. I trust that you can.